Well, let's hear from the government's nominee to become the first commissioner of televised leaders' debates in this country. David Johnston joins me now from Toronto. Mr. Johnston, good to speak with you again, and I appreciate you taking the time to discuss this new important role you've been given. And I guess we should point out right from the outset that you do have experience moderating televised leaders' debates in the past, so you're no stranger to this process. But let me start with the process. The Minister, Karina Gould, talks about the need to open up the process around the televised leaders' debates and that you're the right person to make that happen. So why did you accept this role?
Well, simply because I was asked. I'm honored to be asked to participate in an important part of our public institutions for a vibrant democracy. So when I was asked, I said, by all means, I'm delighted and honored.
You'll be naming an advisory panel of 7 members. Who will make up that group?
Well, the criteria are set out in the minister's announcement and the order of council. It will be broadly representative of the political parties, of the broadcasters and media, and persons in minorities across the country, be they linguistic, be they people with disabilities, etc. We want to be sure that the Advisory Council comprehends the broad interests of all Canadians.
So it will have some former politicians and perhaps some former journalists making it up as well.
Yes, people who've had experience in our democratic institutions, particularly a keen interest in elections and how one assures debates that reach as wide a audience in Canada as possible, and ensures that we take best advantage of the new means of communication as well to reach all Canadians, particularly younger generation.
You're being mandated to organize a minimum of 2 nationally televised debates, one in English and one in French. Do you think that's enough?
Well, I hope we'll see these 2 debates as kind of centerpieces, but that we'll see other debates and other carrying of the feeds from these debates and others through the very broad spectrum of media that we have today, so that it becomes a very lively part of Canadians' participation in the work up to the elections and the actual choices when the vote is made.
So in a perfect landscape, you see these as the must-have debates that the Canadians must have access to, but it sounds like you're hoping that there might be a jumping-off point for media outlets and others to see if they can put together other debates as well.
Yeah, very much so. I guess the televised debates first came into North American practice back in 1960 in the United States, and began, I think, formally in Canada some years after that. The first 2 I participated in were 1979 and 1984. And of course, the media world has changed a lot since then, and I think it's important that we adjust and try to be sure that we're using every appropriate avenue to ensure that Canadians are engaged and they see the different points of view and the different leadership characteristics of the people who hope to be Prime Minister of the country in these debates.
There's nothing in your mandate, though, that I've seen that compels media outlets, not even the national broadcaster, to carry the debates you organize.
Yes.
Should that be a concern?
Well, it's been an interesting question, and quite a good consultation process with a major study conducted by the Institute for Public Policy, Research in Public Policy, and then the House of Commons Committee on Procedures and Affairs had very substantial testimony. And out of that, they came to the conclusion, the recommendations which have found their way into the minister's statement, that there should not be compulsion on the part of any of the leaders to participate, but one hopes that the debate will be clear enough and transparent enough and inviting enough that there will be very enthusiastic participation. And with respect to the media involvement, there'll be a request for proposals for consortia to come forward to respond to the requirements of carrying off the debate that is of high standard and integrity, but reaches as wide an audience as possible.
Okay, but I guess what I'm getting at is what happens if, at the end of the day, media outlets who've been used to organizing them don't like perhaps the format, don't like the issues, and who's going to get to choose all those? Who's going to decide what the debate looks like? And at that point, maybe some media go, look, we don't think this is the kind of debate we want to carry. We don't think it's touching on the right issues, so we're out. Are you worried about that?
Well, those are issues, of course. There's been quite substantial consultation already, and there will be more consultation, and the advisory committee of 7 will have its own broad groups that will advise, and I expect out of that we'll find the format and the arrangements will be such that all parties will be quite enthusiastic about participating.
Okay, let's look at the 3 criteria for a party leader to be included in the debates. The government has set out in the announcement today, and a leader needs to meet at least 2 of these 3 criteria. They need at least 1 MP at the time of the election call, or they intend to run candidates in at least 90% of the 338 ridings, or that they obtained 4% of the vote in the last campaign, or have a, quote, legitimate chance to win seats in the upcoming election. How will you determine who has a legitimate chance to win seats?
Well, one will look, I think, at polling results. One will look at the political history of the particular group, and one will also look at the nature of the efforts that that particular group has made to present itself to Canadians. That has an element of subjectivity, but I'm really very pleased that out of this twofold consultation process, and particularly the work of the House of Commons Committee, there's been quite a strong convergence around those 3 criteria, and that 2 of the 3 should be satisfied. So there'll be a judgment to be made there, but I'm really very delighted that that has been refined to the degree it has been.
Right, they are already, though. So some of the opposition parties today expressing concerns about that term, legitimate chance, and wondering whether that shouldn't have been more clearly defined. And some people will worry, okay, so now we're going to turn over the inclusion in leaders debates to polling companies. How do you respond to that?
Well, that's always an issue when you have to make decisions about inclusion or otherwise. You know, on the one hand, you want as wide and broad a participation as possible. On the other hand, you want to have sufficient focus that the people who are appearing do represent significant political interests. And so, well, I guess in the ideal world, you develop mathematical formula that would leave no room for decision, but that, I think, isn't the real world when conditions change somewhat. So I'm actually quite comfortable with the 3 criteria as expressed in the minister's statement and that have come from the consultation process up to date.
Sure. Let me circle back to some, in a couple of questions I have left here, circle back to something we touched on a little earlier. Do you wish you had the power to punish leaders or to find some way of punishing leaders if they decide not to attend the debates, which is what we saw last time in the consortium debates?
I guess it's a personal opinion, but I don't think so. You know, democracy is strong in this country. Television coverage is well established, social media, and I'm really quite satisfied that we'll see a good, strong interest by the leaders of the different parties, and we'll be eager to have the opportunity in a format that is clear, established in advance, of integrity, to say, sure, this is something that we want to do and will participate very vigorously.
Let's finish on this, and it touches sort of on your nomination announcement today, and some in the opposition saying, look, they weren't consulted. The government has named you, but you know, they don't have anything against David Johnston. That's not the issue, but they're concerned about the process, that they did not get to play a role in picking you as the choice to lead this commission. Some have suggested that the government's trying to rig the process by having the appointment, rig the electoral process to their benefit. How would you answer those concerns about your nomination, and what can you do to address them?
Well, that was a result, I think, of a well-established process with a fair amount of consultation over the past 12 to 18 months, and it is a nomination. It's not a firm decision. There will be a meeting with the House of Commons Committee on Procedures and Affairs, et cetera. There'll be further consultation with the parties, and at the end of the day, I think the minister will have to make a decision, and that will be fine.
All right, David Johnston, thanks for your time today, sir. Appreciate it.
A pleasure as always. Thank you.